The offices of a small printing works in the Scottish town of Innerleithen, 100 years ago.
Mr. Smale, an order for 50 posters for James Smith, the auctioneer.
All right, thank you, Miss Suter.
Mr. Robert Smale, the owner.
Sam,
Yes, Mr. Smale.
would you please take that to the case room?
Yes, sir.
Sam, the new boy apprentice. The case room, where the printing process begins.
All right, Sam, that's the 50 posters for James Smith auctioneers. Right, thanks, son. 50 posters in a hurry, Eric. I'll set the wooden type, but you set the rest.
That's fine, Mr. Hannah.
Mr. Hannah and Mr. Rooney, the compositors, start picking the letters they need from the cases of type. First, the big wooden letters. The letters are picked in the right order, but they're upside down and mirror image, so they'll come out the right way round when they're printed. As he completes each line of type, Mr. Hannah lays it on his printer's stone inside a metal frame. Mr. Rooney picked small metal type from the compartments in his case. It took many years to learn these skills properly.
How do you know where all the letters are kept?
When you've been setting type as long as I have, son, you'll know where they are as well. Now, if you just put me past.
Another line of completed type goes into the frame. Your turn will come one day, Sam. And so it goes on, until all the words needed for the poster are made up. It's done, and the finished lines of type are hammered tightly into place in a special frame called a form.
Just to make sure it's lifting and the type doesn't fall out.
Before Mr. Hannah lets the job go any further, he must make one print to prove that it's okay, on this proofing press. These printing methods are not much different from those invented and used by Gutenberg over 400 years before, though what they're printing is very different.
That's fine, Sam. Just wash it over and take it downstairs to the machine room.
Yes, sir.
It'll take a young apprentice like Sam 7 years to learn the printing trade. Until then, he will look, listen and learn, and keep things clean and tidy. Once he's cleaned it up, Sam can take the finished job down to the machine room to be printed. The form, the metal frame with all the type in, is so heavy there's a wooden groove to slide it down the stairs. Onto the press, ready to be printed. Up in the case room, Sam has a problem.
The lesson to be learned here, Sam, is never lift a form off the stone without first checking that it's been locked up properly.
Back in the machine room, the Wharfdale cylinder press is printing the potato posters. To print on the paper, the frame of made-up type goes backwards and forwards under the cylinder, inked by the rollers as it goes.
That's the 50 posters for Smith the auctioneer, Miss Suter.
Oh, thank you.
I'll just pop that top one into the guard book.
Okay.
Keep the record straight.
Printers keep a sample of everything they print in a big book, called a guard book. In the years that followed, Robert Smale's business went first to his son and then to his grandson. All this time they kept using the same beautiful old presses. Over a period of 100 years, they filled over 50 of these guard books with samples of the work they printed. The work that came off their printing presses gives a fascinating picture of the life of the town. For the year 1916, the middle of the First World War, we find brochures and price lists for the local woolen mills. There are railway labels for sending their woolen goods to the army depot in Woolwich. There are hundreds of little printed tags to tie to the rolls of cloth. There are envelopes for the company's agents around the world, in Argentina and in Russia. There are tickets for dances to raise money for the troops, and a private notice of a death in the family.
Mary Jardine Macpherson, my daughter, died here this morning at 10 o'clock.
Eventually, the modern world began to creep up on Smales, the printers. By 1930, it's the motor car and the newfangled wireless. Old Mr. Smale could not go on forever using these age-old methods. In 1986, he pulled his last proof. Mr. Smale retired, and Smales the printers closed down. Today, the Robert Smales Printing Works is a museum. All the old printing equipment is still there for people to see.
This is the case room. Those are the cases of type. Uppercase, lowercase. So let me see you set your names up now. And if you
Children from St. Ronan's Primary School are trying their hand at printing. They need to pick out the letters of type from the cases, putting them the right way round and in the right order to make their names. The small letters are in the lower case, and the capital letters are in the upper case.
Capital A, yes, well, that is next to Q.
Why just use another space?
Yes, yeah. There are thick spaces, medium spaces, thin spaces.
Doesn't fit in there.
Well, use a medium space. Perhaps a thin space in there. Use that box there, that's it. And tuck it in there, rather than put it on the end. That's it. That's very good indeed. This one next.
Their finished names are all put together so they can be printed.
Now, using a piece of page cord, we're going to tie up this type into a little block so that it can be moved easily.
Why is it called page cord?
Well, all those separate lines that you see here, they've all been tied up in the shape of a page. So that is that block of type made secure, and it can be moved about, it can be lifted, probably, if the compositor has done his job satisfactory. Well, just one little piece of spacing has fallen out, so that's really very good. There we are. Now, what are we going to find here, I wonder? Now, can anybody tell me what's wrong here with this proof?
Peter wrote his name forward instead of a mirror image.
Well, it's an easy mistake to make. Now, we'll have a look at the different sizes of type that you'll find in the printing works.
Next, Mr. Hanna gave them a tour of the works.
Everyone going to catch one there? There we are. Now we'll compare this capital A in the wooden type with this small letter in the metal type. Now you can see the difference, can't you?
Yes.
We can see this right across the street on a poster, and this would be for perhaps a dance ticket or a concert program.
How do you know what the different letters are because they're not labelled?
Well, the reason for the layout is frequency of use. The most used letter in the English language is the lowercase e, which is the biggest box in the case. Below that comes the lowercase h. Next to that, on the left-hand side, the lowercase n, and above that, the lowercase d. On the outside of the case, we have the lowercase j's, the z's, the q's, and the v's, which are obviously not used very much.
All the different styles of type the printers used had their own special names.
Script. Roman, Great Primer Roman, Great Primer Antique, 24-point grotesque. I'm talking now about the sizes of the type. 12-point grotesque, 18-point grotesque, 48-point Hugo, 48-point Divine, Brevier Edina. There are hundreds of different phases of type.
Every size and design of type started off as a metal punch, with the shape of the letter carved on the end of it, just as it was in Gutenberg's time, 400 years before. But at the beginning of the 20th century, printing methods began to change. In Gutenberg's day, punches were filed by hand, but by now they could be made by machine. This feeler moves around the giant H and makes the machine cut a tiny H on the metal punch. In Gutenberg's day, the punch was hammered into a piece of soft metal to make the letter mould. Now, the letter moulds could be stamped out by machine. A row of little H moulds. In the past, type was set by hand. But by the 20th century, a new way had been invented. The monotype keyboard. This amazing machine, invented over 100 years ago, recorded information about the letters being typed by punching holes into a roll of paper. Before this, metal type was cast by hand. Now it could be cast by a machine. The monotype casting machine read the information on the punched paper and automatically made the letters. Everything had to work very precisely. An engineering miracle. The casting machine had its own pot of molten lead, so it could make the letters as it went. Until computers took over, monotype casting machines were used by printers all over the world to print more and more books. 50 years ago, the first paperbacks were printed, small books that people could afford, novels, plays and poems, and children's books. Today, with so many books around, it's easy to forget that someone had to write them in the first place.
Acquaint the reader with the cause and origin of the interruption described in the last chapter.
Over 150 years ago, Charles Dickens first wrote his book Nicholas Nickleby in his own handwriting.
Well, in this case, we're looking at two of the library's most famous manuscripts.
It's kept here at the British Library in London, and children from Swaffield School, Wandsworth, have come to have a look.
On the left is Charles Dickens, Nicholas Nickleby. And when you look at this little manuscript book, what do you notice about it?
Sometimes.
Yes, there are lots of crossings out. And he's writing very fast because it was written in monthly parts. And he was always behind, so he didn't have time to be neat. Now, on the other side, we have a different, very different looking manuscript by Lewis Carroll. It's the original manuscript of Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, but it's very much neater than the other one. And if you look closely, you'll see he's made his writing look like print, because he wanted to make it look like a real little book.
I hope I shan't grow any more. I wish I hadn't drunk so much.
Alas, it was too late to wish that.
150 years ago, a new invention changed the way people wrote, the Steel Nib. The factories of Birmingham worked 24 hours a day to make nibs by the million. Stamped out by machine, they were so cheap, everyone could use them.
Right, class, take out your pens, your pieces of paper, your blotting paper. We're going to do some handwriting. Hurry up!
In a Victorian schoolroom 100 years ago, learning proper handwriting was a serious matter,
Get a move on, Kevin.
as the children of St. Ronan's School were finding out.
Keep your paper straight.
The steel nib kept running out of ink, so you'd have to keep dipping it in the inkwell for some more. This is how it should be done. Thick and thin, push and pull. The steel pen never wore out and didn't need trimming like the old quill pen. In those days, this copperplate writing was used on all legal documents and office ledgers, written out by thousands of clerks whose job it was to write neatly. Writing a letter became an elegant art. The invention of the typewriter over 100 years ago changed all that. The earliest machines had their keys arranged in a special way to stop them jamming. Computers still have this QWERTY keyboard today. This machine typed from underneath. You had to lift up the roller to see what you'd done. On this machine, the letters came down and hit the paper from the sides. And on this one, they punched in from the front. This famous Underwood machine set the standard for typewriter design for the next 100 years. Millions of these machines took over from handwriting in offices all over the world. An electric motor made the typewriter faster and easier. Over the years, the typewriter changed the way it looked and the way it worked. Here, the letters are all over the face of a metal golf ball. But soon, even the most modern typewriter would be replaced by the computer and the word processor and find itself on the junk room shelf.